Good day, everyone, and welcome back to day number 4 of the Intelligent Automation World Series. My name is Rochelle Hood, and it's been an absolute delight for me to serve as the chairwoman for this week's event, now in its 5th year of running in a digital format. I also have the opportunity to serve each of you in my daily role where I serve as SSON's Global Head of Customer Analytics and Research, gathering the research and all of the data that hopefully will bring you relevant, interesting content and things that you can apply in your daily operations and daily work in shared services and global business services and BPO environments. We have had 3 wonderful days so far. We are just 3 more presentations away from delivering 19 different sessions to you this year. One of the key changes of focus this year has been not to just provide you with the material in the sessions, but in each of those provide you with additional resources to actually directly apply to your work, whether that's you're preparing a business case, you'd like a team, some material for team meetings, you're going to hold a town hall and you want to deliver some updates and key relevant statistics. We have provided that for you, we hope, that's quite useful in each and every one of the sessions. So today's lineup, just to give you a quick preview, we're going to start with a wonderful discussion about chatbots. This comes as direct feedback from all of you in our last event when we had IA World Series in September. One of the key points that was added was, could we get more information on chatbots and direct ways that things we need to consider when implementing them. So we're going to kick off with that. The second session of the day today is going to be energizing transformation through the power of AI. This is a particularly interesting use case. This is the renewable energy sector, one that's under great change and rapid expansion right now. And with that, we're going to talk about how AI is used there and how you can apply that with your own enterprise change environment. And then we're going to close out the last presentation today with the future of AI in 2025, specifically as it applies to shared services. We have a high-level executive from Siemens who's going to be joining us, who's also part of our Global Advisory Board, give his vision on that, have some interactive discussion with all of you. And then immediately following that, I'll be delivering my chairwoman's remarks, so I hope you'll all join me for that and share any of your comments as well, but I'll be highlighting some additional resources at that time. So with today's agenda out of the way, let's walk through a couple quick logistics and jump right into our dialogue. So first of all, if you're joining us for the first time, let me navigate you through the audience view screen. On the left-hand side, there's a Q&A box. If you have technical issues or questions related to the conference, put that information in there. My colleague Ashley is joining us today, and he'll be happy to get right back to you. But also, this is the way that you're going to engage with our speakers. You'll notice that this is short on slides and big on dialogue, and part of that dialogue includes you. So please do put your comments, your examples, your questions, your challenges in that box, and we will be happy to incorporate that into this discussion. On the right-hand side, this is where digital networking starts for you. You're going to see the bios and detailed information for both of our presenters, and also underneath that, there's a social button. This is the expedited way at the touch of a fingertip to build your network by directly connecting and adding another person to collaborate with to help you solve your challenges. And then lastly, at the very bottom of your screen, as I mentioned, each one of our sessions has provided you with opportunities for additional resources. I have shared our global market report. I also have shared our annual survey. We survey our entire database, global database. We have more than 150,000 members around the world. From that, we extract the analysis and the results and put that into a format that's digestible and visualized for you. So please do take an opportunity to look at that. That's good benchmark data. If you need to put a report together or quote some stats, there would be the report to draw from. And then finally, you're going to see that the moderator for the discussion today is one of our wonderful parts of our guest columnist team, and I've given you a link to his columns. If you'd like to see some of the other things he writes about, not just what we're talking about today, please do take an opportunity to bookmark that column and keep up on the articles he submits. So with that out of the way, let's talk about chatbots. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Encore, who besides being one of our distinguished SSON columnists, has a long career as an advisor and an industry expert in multiple roles and different consulting positions, and certainly has had a unique view, which is why we call upon him as a columnist, because he's worked with many different industry sectors, and he truly specializes in this shared services environment. So Encore, Ankur, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the stage to introduce our panelists and to moderate today's discussion on chatbots. Now over to you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and I will be facilitating the session on chatbot. With me, I have Manish Singh, and I will let Manish Singh give his brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening to all who are participating and listening to us. I'm Manish. I lead the innovations for Reckitt Benckiser's health side, and I've been in this particular industry for the last 16 years. We've been looking at bots, robotics, and others in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Manish. Manish, with your illustrious career, do you want to very briefly tell us about your journey of chatbot and how you started thinking about chatbot at Reckitt Benckiser? What triggered this, motivated you to adopt chatbot?
Well, I think the trigger was, peer pressure, right? Everybody's doing it. We should do it. No, I'm just kidding, right? So I think the most important requirement that comes across from any chatbot perspective was how do we make things easier for our employees, stakeholders, customers, and how do we build more of interfaces, right? Because the more you move towards into this new generation which is there, right? It's more of collaborations and bringing people together, resolving queries faster is what we need to think through. In the world of now, which is more of WhatsApp, Snapchat, and then moving on to video chats, voice chats, and others, right? Chatbot fits in perfectly. However, we need to start building chatbots. It's very difficult for us to remember all the names of the chatbots, right? So when we started conceptualizing how a chatbot should look like, right, the most important thing that we had to look at was, do I want people to interact with thousands of chatbots? Or do I want my employees or my stakeholders to interact with one universal chatbot sort of a scenario where it's like a single platform for them where they just chat on their problem statements, and depending upon the type of query which is triggered across, responds immediately and quickly. And that's what the most important thing was when we wanted to conceptualize, saying that how should my chatbot look like?
Great. I mean, that sounds perfect. Complex yet achievable. While you mentioned one of the reason for adopting chatbot was the ability for the organization to look at various channels, do you also want to tell the audience about various steps or the implementation journey of chatbot? Is it as straightforward as anybody can think, or do you felt a lot of challenges in between?
Very well said question, Ankur. But typically when we are trying to build chatbots, right, there are 4 phases one should always look at, right? And I'm going to share a slide as well on the 4 phases, right? For me, the most important thing when we are looking at a chatbot is always going to start with exploration, right? We need to explore things. We need to define what my problem statements are. Am I looking at only a scenario? Am I looking at a way high-end sort of an chatbot that I'm trying to build in across? Once we explore chatbots, right, and when we have the basic chatbot available, we need to start experimenting with things. We need to start looking at saying that, can I do API integrations? Can I integrate with something else? Can I give more information to the clients or to my stakeholders and others in terms of bringing information or sending information across to them? That's my level 2. After the experimentation which is done, right, I need to expand my chatbot, saying that, am I only looking at one vertical? Can I bring in more verticals into the same chatbot? Can I make it more complex in nature? Right? That's partially that I'm trying to bring in or put information into the system as well. As an example could be, let's say, I want to apply my leaves. My exploration could be saying that, tell me how many leaves do I have? My experimentation or my next level of expansion that I want to do it across could be, can you apply my leave application? Can you apply a leave for me? Right? And my final stage, when I look at it, it's more of enhancements, saying that, can I bring in the artificial intelligence or natural language processing into it, where it not only interacts with me, but it starts responding to me like an empathy, right? So I'm talking to an individual. I'm not talking to a chatbot. So it's sentiment analysis, right? Otherwise, it becomes like a very monotonous for people when they're trying to interact with chatbot. And typically when you see chatbots nowadays in the industry, they're only giving you a response which is typically monotone. You get fascinated when a chatbot starts responding to you in a manner a friend would do it across. So it's like when you're talking to your friend on WhatsApp, you get hooked to it. So the chatbot's final stage could be when you're absolutely hooked to the chatbot, when it's trying to do the answers that you're looking at, also does a lot of small talk with you. So the challenge that happens across right now in the industry is that people start jumping onto the last stage. They want results immediately across, which is thrown to them. Give time, right? Think about it. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Define your problems very critically. And that's what is the main aim and the challenges that we always face across when we're trying to build chatbots.
Great. So intelligent chatbots is what we heard. You mentioned about NLP and use of various artificial intelligence tools to build chatbot. Do you suggest that, or do you envision that NLP is going to be a very critical part of entire chatbot journey? And do you already see enough solutions or using NLP?
In the recent world that we are looking into the chatbot, it is expanding day by day. A lot of natural language processing is being done across. Whether you do it through machine learning, whether you bring in an ontology, which is more of English language conversations and others, or more of vocabulary building and others. Everything that we try and build it across, it's all depending upon the type being thrown across at the back-end part of it. Yes, we need to train the bot like a baby. People start asking questions across saying, why is the chatbot not responding to the way it should be, right? NLP plays a very important role. So as humans as well, right, we have a lot of computing power when we're trying to understand problems, right? So when we teach babies, that's the way we teach our chatbots as well. So it starts from an infant, and then the more data that you put across at the backend part of it, the NLP engine keeps on training it more and more. So NLP will play a very important role in all the chatbot developments that we do it across. You need to have very strong people or very strong techs who are actually sitting behind the NLP engine, not just to, let's say, trigger it across from a machine learning perspective, but also from an empathy perspective, right? Because a chatbot needs to understand the sentiment of what an individual is responding. And the response should come in a particular manner that I'm trying to able to understand what your sentiments are. So it shouldn't happen like they're saying that, oh, I'm very happy today. I'm very sad to hear about your happiness today, right? Or I have a problem which is more related to prevention of sexual harassment, let's say. But then the chatbot responds to me, oh, good to hear that. I'll get pissed off on the chatbot, right? I'll go back on the chatbot and tell it saying that I don't want to come to such a chatbot which is not responding to me in a manner which I would need some empathy onto it, right? But if I write to chatbot saying that I'm really frustrated, right? Can you help me? Or can you tell me a joke, let's say? If a chatbot responds saying that you're very frustrated or that you're very sad today, but let me help you with telling you a joke, will that probably set up the mood for you? It's like talking to a friend. But if you look at from the end perspective or a tech side perspective, it is the NLP engine which is running at the back end, which is helping the chatbot provide such responses which are there. So it's going to become very, very important and critical as we move into the journey of chatbots.
Chatbot with empathy. Who could have ever thought of it? Very interesting, Manish. Manish, very often I've heard on my several interactions, a lot of people thought as an extended arm of RPA. They think that chatbot is nothing but a more sophisticated automation. Do you agree with that? And do you think an organization can have RPA and chatbot as a mutually exclusive scenarios?
Awesome question again, Ankur. But chatbots and RPAs, definitely go hand in hand. An RPA typically works at the back end of the chatbot, right? Or at the back end part of it, where you're trying to do a lot of machine interactions and others. Chatbot apparently is the front end, right? You're interacting with individuals to try and bring about the empathies and the sympathies and the problem statement or the type of critical problems that you're trying to solve from them. Typically, RPA is more problem-based, chatbots are more open-ended. You're trying to have those individuals do more interact, more personifications around it. Can they go hand in hand? Definitely they can go hand in hand, because any chatbot that we build across, I can still use an RP at the backend to pull the information from the system that I'm looking into. It need not be that I always interact with chatbot the way from a question answer perspective. So both go hand in hand. Both can be used mutually exclusive as well as put together as well.
Fantastic. I think there might be an audience question here. So Rochelle, do you want us to take an audience question in between?
Absolutely. Early and often is always good. So let me just present the question to you. Mark would like to know, how do you think about scaling chatbots within several business units? I assume you don't have all kinds of different chatbot solutions in different business units. Basic question is just scaling chatbots in general. Is there anything that you should consider when you're just using one versus when you're using it across different units and different processes?
Thanks for the question, Mark. When I look at developing chatbots which are there, right, always have a problem statement in mind, right? The biggest challenge that happens across when we are developing chatbots is that we become very Q&A oriented, building chatbots for that particular vertical itself. The challenge that happens across is that when I'm trying to build chatbots across multiple verticals, let's say sales, HR, IT, and others, the biggest challenge that we face across as techies is that the intent clashes starts to happen, right? Every intent that you build for sales can collide or have a same understanding with HR, can have a same understanding with IT, right? That's where the most important thing that comes across is, do I want to build in a chatbot which is more vertical oriented, or do I want to build a chatbot which is more horizontal oriented? That's the call that we always face across in terms of developing chatbots across the organization. The other biggest challenge that happens across is that it depends upon the type of use cases that you're trying to bring in terms of developing the chatbots across horizontals as well, right? So if I have a chatbot which is, let's say, on HR in India or in US or in a particular geography, can I try and see and use the similar type of chatbots across multiple geographies, right? So every geography will have a different type of a use case or let's say an SOP which is trying to be solved across, right? Or a problem statement which is absolutely different. The responses are different. So you need to train your chatbot again and again in terms of presenting it that particular way. Challenging, yes. Does all my problems across immediately? Maybe no, but you need to give it time in terms of training it across as well, right? So if you have to scale your chatbot across multiple locations, technically possible, but you need to have a lot of business connect or a business, let's say, business knowledge around it in terms of bringing it all together. I hope that answers your question.
All right.
Thank you for that. I think, sorry, I was going to say, well, let's just go ahead and continue on, but I did want to remind everyone, keep the questions coming, as we'll be breaking for them periodically. Thanks, Ankur. Back to you.
Thank you. So moving on, Manish. Yeah. Another thing which we have often seen is client start their chatbot journey with a lot of pomp and show, and quite often they couple of prototypes, and that's where it ends. Why do you think, or how do you think industry can increase the adoption of chatbot?
Tricky question, Ankur. But more and more organizations are right now adopting chatbots, right? And it's mostly for customer interactions and how they can try and, let's say, resolve some of the problems the customers are facing. The biggest challenge which is coming out from the chatbots part of it is that how do I make it more scalable in nature? Or how do I make it more specific to user cases of all the problems which are there, right? The challenge is always there. How do I adopt more? The more business problems that I try and solve it across is one of the ways of trying to get in more adoptions, right? The other biggest adoption is, what are the business problems which my customers are facing? So if I bring in those interactions from the customer into my problem statement, which I'm trying to develop it on the chatbots, is always going to help me in terms of scaling it up. The other which is there is that if you go by industry to industry, right? So let's say for a hospitality industry, it's more of customer happiness index that I'm trying to look into, right? Does my chatbot help me solve those? If I go to IT services, it's more of ticketing that I need to look at, right? So you need to define your cost benefit analysis in terms of what is it that we're trying to solve, and thus the adoption becomes much faster. Most of the people or most of the industries have a lot of difficulties in terms of quantifying the results from a chatbot, right? And that's the biggest challenge that we always face across, saying that is the chatbot going to give me impact in terms of dollars, right? That's where it becomes more critical for us to define my problem statement and have a healthy pipeline in place for us to keep adopting and keep challenging the chatbot scenarios as well, right? The more and more I add, the more it becomes for people to come and interact with it. Otherwise, if I just bring it like a Q&A question, which is more related to, let's say, policy, I would probably ask it once or twice in a year, right? I'll just ask the question and move out. Do I interact with the chat? Maybe not. But then from an organization perspective, does that help me? Initially, it does. But then over a period of time, people start losing interest into the chatbot. The most important chatbot usage comes across, or the adoption rate comes across, is the more features that you keep adding across into the chatbot. And that's where the adoption of the chatbots will become more desirable by the organization and more profitable for the organization. So let's say if it's like a sales company, I initially started with, let's say, HR as a question. I may want to move into the sales part as well, saying that can I take orders from my clients onto my chatbots, right? Why do I need to send emails across? It becomes more interactive. Can I do faster? Can I make it, let's say, the biggest challenge that when people travel across is conquer expenses, right? We do a lot of expenses. My chatbot, I need to go into a lot of application to fill in those. Can I make that on itself? It's just, you just chat with the chatbot and fill it up, right? But it all depends upon the type of use cases that I'm trying to bring in. The more adoption I bring in onto my chatbot, the more profitable it becomes in long run, right? As an example, right, if you look at IT services, you get a lot of calls to resolve your tickets which are there. Can I use a chatbot in resolution of my tickets? The number of tickets goes down, definitely my profitability goes up, right? And that's how you cross in terms of use cases, which makes it more profitable, adoptable for any organization to take up chatbots which are there. Challenging initially, need to have a lot of patience in the initial times, but yes, it definitely pays.
Wonderful. So sounds music to my ears, putting orders on chatbot, sending invoice details on chatbot, etc. I mean, I would love to wait for that day to happen. So that sounds like it's a continuous process, ever learning, demand generation is important. So do you agree that the role of business or the role of stakeholders who are actual end users of not just the end users, but who are actually the business owners of organizations is very important in this program?
Absolutely. So it's the business which brings in all the business problems that you want to code it or, let's say, put it onto the chatbot part of it, right? At the end of the day, you're trying to solve some business problems using chatbot. It's not just for, let's say, it's not like a matrimonial sort of a site where you go and chat around with it. Probably in matrimonial sites also you have chatbots, right, where you can go and find your match. But then the problem statement is what is very, very critical, because that is what is going to drive the adoption of the chatbot. Right? So if your problem statement talks about that, I want, from a finance industry perspective, I want to know the invoice processing, or I want to know the status of my invoice, or if I want to know about the payment of my invoice, has it happened or not? It's a problem statement that you're trying to drive, right? On a matrimony side, which we talked about, right? But then are you trying to find your exact match, which is there on the matrimonial site, by using certain filters onto the chatbot? You don't need to go to the website, just put it on your WhatsApp and then chat with it. It depends upon the problem statement. So it is very critical that we have an absolute business buy-in and business connect in terms of solving the chatbot problem, right? Also, the most important thing that happens across is when a chatbot responds, it is responding a particular answer which the user has asked a question on. The way it is supposed to be defined also, the business plays a very important role in terms of saying what should be the response of a chatbot. Because from an IT perspective, you're only coding in the answers or the empathy at the back end in terms of what the response should be. but you should always be in connect with the business in terms of saying whether the response which has been provided by the chatbot, is it appropriate or not? Or the way it has been put forward to the end user, is it really making sense for that particular person to read it across and tell it makes it working for me, right? So it becomes very, very important and critical for us to finalize and analyze what business wants. At the end of the day, it's the customer which is the kingmaker in this.
Great. So we heard a couple of things, Manish, right? We heard about the chatbot as a solution, as an implementation. We heard about the role of business. We heard about the role of IT. Is that all it is required for the organizations to be chatbot ready, or is there something else?
The most important thing, which I think any organization needs to be ready with, is a lot of patience, right? A chatbot will not start giving you results probably on day one. It will, but then you need to have the right set of people, the right set of, let me put it, the right set of positive people to accept failures at the beginning. Because if you do not accept failures at the beginning for any organization, your chatbot either will end its journey, will not be utilized to the way, or will not be adopted in a way that you would want the organization to have a look at it, right? You can have a healthy pipeline, you can have funds, you can have good business use cases, but then if you do not have patience in the initial part and you want results next day, it's not happening. It's a baby. It will take time to grow. Like we talk and teach our babies to grow and understand the language that we are talking, is the same way that you need to give time to the chatbots to learn, to enhance, to improve. You need to do a lot of experimentations at the beginning when you're developing chatbots, right? And that's where organizations fail, because they want results the moment the chatbot is ready. Give it time. It takes time. Some of the cases, it may take 3 to 6 months as well, depending upon the type of business problem that you're trying to solve. In some cases, it may give you a result in a month's time if it is only Q&A based.
So what do you think can be the short-term and long-term KPIs to measure the success of chatbot?
If I have to look at it, let's say the short-term KPI for me would be the response rate. Is my chatbot responding accurately or not? But my long-term KPI, I would want to use my long-term KPI as adoption. And how many times have people come back to the chatbot again and again, which is the reusage of my chatbot, right? And that's become very critical. So if I only have 100 users on my chatbot right now, do I have a 95% return rate or above? Right? If I don't have a 95% return rate, or my return rate is diminishing over a period of time, that means my chatbot's adoption has gone down. That means the value addition that the chatbot is bringing to the organization probably has gone down, or the number or the interest of people into my chatbot has gone down. That means I need to either bring in new features, think about saying that, do I want to shut down my chatbot?
Again, very interesting thought. So it's about value, it's about impact, right? It's not just about cost reduction or efficiency, which is typically associated with any other automation program. And as you said, it comes with the element of human empathy. Having seen or implemented multiple chatbot programs, what do you think are the common pitfalls or issues which any organization should be aware of and they can prevent in advance?
Fair question, Ankur, but I think we've talked about some of these pitfalls and failures which typically happen across, right? So like we were talking about, if my adoption rate is not great, I'm forcing a failure of my chatbot, right? If my problem statements are not very clearly defined, I'm looking for a failure for my chatbot, right? If I fall into too much of complexities at the beginning of my chatbot, the chances for me on a failure side are higher, only because I will spend more time in developing the chatbot than actually using the chatbot, right? The more complexities that I bring in, that's where. So you need to take your steps or baby steps in such a manner that you would want your chatbot to be successful, right? For example, when a baby is born, I'm always talking to the chatbot as babies, because when I build my chatbots, I treat them as my kids. So when a baby is born, right, you don't start teaching him or her physics or quantum physics and others. You need to give it time to learn to speak first, and then analyze, then articulate, and then move on in terms of higher studies or enhancements into the technicalities which we are bringing in. But make them understand functionalities and the business scenarios that we want to adapt from a chatbot, right? The other biggest pitfall that happens across is we as organizations want results as of yesterday, right? And that's the biggest challenge that we will always face across when we are developing chatbots. In RPA, when you put a bot into it, you see an impact immediately. In chatbot, it all depends upon the adoption rate that we are trying to bring in, right? So the more adoption or the more features into the chatbot, the more number of user base starts to improve. As soon as your number of user base starts to improve, your typical time spent on Q&A or gathering information or searching for inputs down. So actually, if you look at it, your resources or your employees are utilized in much better manner than they would have been if the chatbots wouldn't have been existing, right? So these are issues that you will always see around, where people just go back and tell you saying that, oh, chatbot is not adding value to me, just shut it down. Or I don't have any further business problems to solve across. I think my chatbot has reached to the maturity. I can't solve it. My rate of retention of people adopting the chatbot starts to go down, right? And that's where the biggest challenges keep happening across. There is so much into the market right now that we can always give it back to the chatbot, right?
Okay. I remembered earlier you mentioned about the concept of universal chatbot. So, moving on to the next slide, do you want to enlighten us and tell us about what is universal bot and how does it work?
Right. So let me give you a small perspective of what a universal bot looks like. So, and this is a very simple diagram. I put it across in terms of for people to understand, right? So it's like saying that if I have a sales bot, I name a sales bot as Selena. Then if I have an HR bot, I name HR bot as Manish, let's say, me. And if I have another IT bot, I name it as Rochelle, which is one of our sponsors as well, right? But then when I'm trying to chat with the chatbot, I as an end user need to remember that I need to talk to Rochelle for IT. Or let's say I need to talk to Manish for sales. I made a mistake there, right? Manish is for HR. But then which chatbot do I need to talk to? Right? So what we tried to do was we tried to make a universal chatbot so that you don't need to worry about whether you want to talk to Manish, Rochelle, or somebody else. My universal chatbot, let's say for the benefit of all of us, is our moderator, which is Ankur. So what all of you need to do is just chat with Ankur. And if the question is pertinent, it will go and pull information from a sales bot. If it is question pertaining to an HR, it will go and pull HR chatbot. So it's like what you're creating called as a Google page or a Google search engine. So if you have any particular question, it will go and pull you that particular information from the respective chatbot which is there. And whether it is critical, yes, it is very critical to define your intents in a particular manner so that your conflicts do not happen. The more you need to train it across, and that's where it comes across as the end part, that when a human is trying to learn it across, it bases the context of the question or bases from which team you are belonging to. When you ask a question to me, I have a context as an individual that you're going to ask me a sales question. That's what we build it at the back end of the chatbot as well, saying that if Manish is asking a particular and the intent is similar to what he's been working upon, pull the information from the HR side and give the response to him. So it's a lot of NLG training that we give it at the backend part of it and machine learning at the backend part of it for the chatbot to realize what type of intent am I asking and which type of information needs to be put across from which direction, right? And that's where the concept of universal bot was being adopted and is being followers of it right now. But then what we are trying to do also is we are trying to learn along with it. And this is our experimentation stage, right? We have not gone beyond that. We are experimenting it more and more. Can I club multiple into a single bot and have interactions with it?
Interesting again. So as you said, it is something which is not followed a lot by many organizations, but like you believe it's the right thing to do, and perhaps is a better architecture for future. Is that right?
Absolutely, Ankur. If you look at it, the more and more adoptions from an organization perspective will be when we are trying to bring in most of the chatbots together, right? Easy to maintain, easy to monitor, easy to have more adoptions, better utilization of resources. Let's say run and maintain much easier. You can only put in a couple of DevOps teams to manage it across. Continuous training becomes important. So you have a tech team which is sitting there, and then you have the functional teams that you can always work along with them in terms of enhancing your capabilities of the chatbot which is there. Adding of new features becomes easier because you are going horizontally across, not vertically deep in. So the more features you add, it gives more excitement for people to come to the chatbot again. Right? You can send surveys through chatbots. You can ask questionnaires through chatbots. You can engage people more onto the chatbots part of it. And that keeps on happening at a universal bot level. You don't need to do it for individual bots. You can do it at a universal bot level. It becomes very interactive for people.
Again, very interesting. I would see some of these stories taking a larger shape in the organization. Do you want to talk a little bit about any other use cases or benefits that chatbot brings?
So if I talk about benefits from chatbot, right? So let me throw a slide across where how chatbot helps us in terms of a lot of benefits that we are bringing into the chatbot, right? So a chatbot can bring in benefits which are more support oriented. A chatbot can bring in benefits which are more pertaining to multi-channel support. It's very supportive from a logs perspective. So if you're having audits and you want to understand what people are asking across and what sort of data which is being passed across, you can have always logs around it. The most important is it's a handoff to a human agent. So when you're let's say if you're an HR BP, right, and you're being asked across a lot of policy questions, that could all be sent to the chatbot, right? And you as an individual can spend more time in interacting with people. And that's what the most important role is. Your basic processes, which are very rudimentary in nature, right, could be all diverted to the chatbot in terms of answering queries, which are very basic in nature, in terms of getting more and more let's say, related to the responses which are there. Reduces your turnaround time as well. So if, let's say, I ask a particular question, if it is taking me 24 hours for somebody to raise a ticket and get a response, chatbot probably can provide me immediately, right? So there is a lot of benefits and use cases, and it depends from industry to important thing is user experience, right? I get a response immediately in a manner that I want it across, or in the most simplified manner, I'll be the most happiest one, right? Rather than somebody giving me a lot of circles around my problem statement and I don't have a response, at least chatbot will come and tell me that I don't have the information. You need to go to this particular person to gain more information. Or if I have the information, immediately I throw it out to the person. It's resolved. Right. So benefits are unimaginable, right? So the more business problems that you bring in, the more it will start solving it for you, right? So it's huge.
So speaking of benefits, have you ever been challenged on the ROI of chatbot? Has anybody said or asked you what's the return on investment for the chatbot?
Always. I think that's one of the questions that we all have to live with, which tells us saying that what is the ROI of my chatbot, right? And that's where my session to all people who are trying to develop their chatbots or trying to develop their chatbots, right? Define your business problem at the beginning end. Define your success criteria which are there, right? Define what is it that you're trying to solve, right? initial measurements are going to come from there. If you develop chatbots which are more into people-facing, more into user experience and others, measure those particular metrics and try and see whether your adoption rate or whether your usage rate, whether your query resolution percentage and others are improving or not. When you're developing chatbots which are more onto the financial impact side, then try and see how many tickets have gone, what type of resolution that are you providing to the customer, has the number of calls been reduced or not, and this is how you will always try and calculate it across your ROIs which are there. So when I initially did across, in most of the organization, they'll always start within HR chatbot because the adoption becomes much easier. People start putting in more emphasis around it. But then is there an ROI around it? Difficult to calculate at times, but then you can always put in certain metrics that you want to measure it across. It definitely saves a lot of time from the HR shared services side of it and the HR BPs which are there, or the HR team which is there, which is trying to, let's say, spend a lot of time in QAs. But then could that be quantified from a direct impact perspective? Difficult, because that is not the primary role of an HR team, or let's say that is not the only role of the HR team. Probably they can spend more quality time in terms of doing something else, right? But if I take the same example or a use case on IT ticketing, if I can reduce the number of calls for my organization, that's a direct impact for me from a financial standpoint perspective, right? So it depends typically on what type of problem statement that you're picking up onto the chatbot and expand it with your key success drivers and key parameters that you want to drive it across, right? Otherwise, it's challenging.
It's always never easy, right? So what do you think would be the key features of an enterprise chatbot?
Oh, features could be enormous, right? So it all depends upon what do we want to bring in from a chatbot perspective. I have listed down some features which do help people out, whether you're looking at cards, whether you're looking at dialogue flows, language understanding. So it can be whether it is personality driven, whether I can call or put information into it. Can it bring me social enterprises into the chatbot? Can I do visual feedbacks into the chatbot, saying that I'm really excited and there is a smiley which is goes? Or can I send a GIF around it? Can I use chatbots on my mobile? So can I do easy chatbots which are there, which is more of mobile driven? Can I do multiple integrations, right? Do I need to always have a web chat which is there, or can I do integrations through WhatsApp, WeChat, Slack, Facebook Messenger, and others, right? The most important, how secured is my chatbot, right? Can I do single sign-ons? Can I do authentications which are there? So there are a lot of features which are available. Can I do automatic routines around it? Can I do knowledge repositories around chatbots which are there, right? So there is a lot of features that you can add onto the chatbot, right? My belief always is that if you can imagine, you can build it. You have an imagination onto a chatbot feature that you want to get it done. It could be difficult in the initial, but it's definitely possible to get it done.
Great. So, Manish, I think we are nearly coming to the end of the session, but I think there is an audience question. So let's just take that. Rochelle, there is an audience question.
Yes, there is. Joseph would like to know, how complicated is the chatbot software in general? Do you need an IT background to configure it, or is it similar to RPA, where most of the coding behind the scenes can be configured in business roles?
Awesome question, right? But then if it all depends upon what platforms do we choose, right? So there are platforms which are available, which are drag and drop, where you can develop your own chatbots. You do need, if you're using a basic chatbot, your drag and drops may work. But if you want to really do high-end or, let's say, enhanced level or experimentation level of chatbots, you probably would need some sort of tech background in terms of coding it across as well. But it all depends upon the type of chatbot platforms that they're using it.
Great. Thank you, Manish. I think we are at the end of our session, so really appreciate your time. It was quite interesting, very insightful, and I'm sure others have loved it too. Thank you, Rochelle. Back to you.
Okay, Manish and Encore, this was very quite useful, and I just wanted to let all of you know when you receive the link to the recording for this session, you're also going to see one more addition, which is the PDF version of these slides. Several of you were asking about that already because there's a lot of good detail in there, and then there's this really great outline about features to consider when you're looking at an enterprise chatbot. So be sure to click on that link when it comes through for the recording of the slides, and then when you do that, you will see the PDF version along with the other resources that are available to you. In those resources, don't forget to also become a fan of Encore's columns. He talks about a lot of different things in his articles, but use the link, get to his column, and you'll be able to see some of the other information that he provides insights to all of us in our global membership on. And then next, the last announcement to make is the next session coming up in just 14 minutes, which is Energizing Transformation Through the Power of AI. So please grab a cup of tea or coffee or a snack wherever you are around the world, and do join us back in 14 minutes. It's been my real pleasure to have both of you on the digital stage with us. We thank you for all of your information and insights. I want to thank the audience for their participation, their questions, and everything that led to this particular session. And also to those of you listening to the on-demand recording, please know that since you weren't with us live, we do hope that you'll keep the conversation going by using the social buttons in the speaker box, make those connections, and do engage with our two presenters because they're very passionate and very skilled and experienced in this topic among many others, and the way you do that is by building your network with them. On that note, this now concludes the webinar session. We hope to see you back in the next one. Good day.